before returning to graduate school out in Oregon at Pacific University, where I got a master's and a doctorate PsyD in clinical and forensic psychology in 2016.
So you're telling this jury that after 6 years of practicing law, you did not want to continue doing that?
I did not.
Okay. You might have to explain that to the rest of us here. When you, how long did it take you to get your, it's a PsyD, is that what it's referred
It's a
to?
doctoral degree in psychology.
Okay. And how long did it take you to obtain that degree?
I had 4 years of coursework and then a year of practicum that I did after I completed the coursework. That was a full-time placement at Georgia Regional Hospital, Atlanta. And then I went and did a full year of internship that specialized in forensics at a hospital in Maryland called Springfield Hospital Center. After I completed that, I was able to get my degree, and then I spent another year there doing a postdoctoral degree education, also specifically in forensics. So I spent 2 years total at Springfield Hospital Center.
Okay. And is that similar to a medical doctor that works in the emergency room that has residencies and things like that?
So it's mandatory. The internship is mandatory for the degree. The postdoc is not mandatory, but it's recommended, especially if you want to go into a specialty area like forensics.
And you did that because that's what you wanted to do, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any current license or certifications that you hold as a psychologist?
I'm licensed to practice psychology in the state of Georgia.
Okay. And that covers both clinical settings and forensic settings?
It's a general license, yeah.
Okay. And how long have you had that license?
Since 2017.
And do you have any annual requirements to retain your license, testing, or?
We don't have any testing requirements. We do have annual requirements. Well, actually, it's every other year we have to have 40 hours of continuing education. So that's done through conferences, webinars, consultation meetings, things like that.
Okay, and you are up to date on all of your annual training requirements?
I am. We just renewed in December.
Okay.
Well, it's renewed in December, but I've already done it.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury what psychology is?
Psychology generally is just sort of the study of the mind.
And what type of, is there any type of diagnostic testing that you do when you are evaluating an individual?
There's a variety of different diagnostics that people can do. It really depends on the specific situation. So if you have a more specific question, I would answer that.
So I was going to ask you a little about the difference between clinical psychology and forensic psychology. So what do you do in a clinical psychological setting?
In a clinical psychological setting, you would at a minimum have a clinical interview, which is where you gather information about the person's background, what kinds of things have happened to them, what kinds of things they've done, their education, and their symptom presentation if they have any symptoms. If there are specific symptoms you're concerned about or specific things they're worried about, like some people want to get an assessment of their cognitive function or some people want to get a diagnosis. So then there are specific tests that can be used for each of those different kinds of questions, and you tailor what tests you're using based on what their concern is, what the referral question is.
And how does that compare or contrast to the area of forensic psychology?
In that way, it's pretty similar. You still are tailoring everything to what the specific referral question is. The biggest difference are sort of in relational issues. If you're a clinical psychologist, you're there for that person. You're trying to help that person. You're trying to be their support. And so you have a different view. They're your client. You believe what they say. You don't have any real reason to question what they're telling you because they're coming to you for help. In a forensic category, they're not your client. The person that you're interviewing is not your client. Usually the person is an attorney or a judge or somebody else other than the person who is speaking to you. And because they have court cases typically or things like that they have to deal with, you have to be more mindful of the fact that they may have an agenda. So you're not taking everything that they say as gospel. You don't just accept the things that you say. You do a lot more on the lines of looking at records and looking at other things to try and to see if what they say is consistent with what has been seen by other people.
Is it fair to say that a clinical psychologist is more in the lines of a therapist? Someone
Yes.
that helps someone through their specific diagnosis?
Yes, that's correct.
And as a forensic psychologist, you are taking the role more as an objective observer, considering not only what that person tells you, correct, but what also you might look at as other collateral sources in evaluating the circumstances of what happened.
That's correct. And we don't do any therapy at all. It would be unfair to the person you're interviewing to pretend like you're a therapist. So we make it very clear up front, we're not your therapist, we're independent. Because if they start believing that you're their therapist, they will interact with you in a different way, and they may come to believe that you're on their side and tell you things that they wouldn't otherwise tell you, and that's not fair. So our job is to be independent and neutral and just reach the best conclusion we can.
And ma'am, are you a member of any professional organizations in your area of psychology?
The sort of standard ones, the American Psychological Association and the Georgia Psychological Association.
Okay. And what about any articles or studies? Have you been involved in publishing anything in these areas?
Not really. I'm more of a hands-on practitioner than a researcher. I have done some presentations on violence, risk, and aggression, and on grooming behaviors. When I talk about grooming, we did a presentation on how sort of predators will bring in, like, it's usually considered in sex crimes where people will bring in girls to be prostitutes, and they groom them to that process. So there's a process of treating them very kindly and helping them out and being their savior, and then exerting control and putting them on the streets and making them do things. So we did I did a presentation for the American Association of Forensic Psychologists that was based on research about grooming like that.
Okay. And how about testifying in court? I assume you've testified in court before, is that right?
I have.
How many times do you believe you've testified?
Not many. Maybe 50.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of the number of times you've testified either for the state or for the defense in a case?
It would be roughly 50-50.
Okay. And each of those times that you have testified, have you been tendered as an expert in the field of either clinical psychology or forensic psychology?
I have.
Okay. Judge, at this time I'm going to move to tender Dr. Garrett as an expert in the areas of forensic psychology, clinical psychology specifically, and I guess specifically on conducting and completing competency and criminal responsibility evaluations.
Any objection? No objection.
All right, so you talked a little bit about a forensic psychology, the difference between clinical and forensic psychology generally. What are the specific steps that you go through when you generally conduct a forensic psychological examination like the ones you would have conducted here?
So I will go and meet the person wherever they are, in the detention center or a hospital or their attorney's office, wherever, and conduct a clinical interview. Spend a lot of time speaking to them about their background, about their mental health symptoms, and about how they're doing at the time of the evaluation. So you're trying to get sort of a full picture of the person from, we start out with where were you born, all the way up to how are you doing today? And then depending on what the referral question is, there would be other sections. So if I were doing a competency evaluation, I would then ask them questions about their understanding of what happens in court, their ability to describe their case, their ability to think clearly about what their legal options are, and their ability to communicate that information to their attorney.
When you, I guess let me take you one step back before you go see them. You receive some sort of document or referral for this process, I assume?
We get a court order and a referral and hopefully at least a police report, indictments, warrants, things like that.
Do you recall in this case who you received the referral from?
I believe the referral came from the state's attorney's office.
Okay, do you remember if it was from Ms. Gropper herself?
I believe so.
District attorney, assistant district attorney, okay. Do you recall when you received that in this case?
It was in 2022.
Do you have your report available to
I
you?
do.
Okay. Can you look on page 1 and Can you look on page 1 and see when you received that?
I can tell you when the order was written, but that's not when I get them.
Sure.
It goes through a whole process, but the order was dated September 30th, 2021.
And then you received it, or your office, I guess,
Our offices
DBHDD
received them in May of 2022.
Okay, and I assume there's a process through DBHDD when they get it, and then they assign it to,
They assign it to a
psychology.
region, and then the region assigns it to a psychologist.
Okay, so you are assigned to a specific region within DBHDD for these types of evaluations?
I'm not personally, but
Okay.
most people are. I work for the state office, which means I'm a floater. They send me where they need evaluators.
Okay.
So I was working up here in this area for a while. Now I'm over in the east. I move around. I'm all over the state.
Okay, all right. So when you get a referral form, does that generally come with, you said you said you hoped you get like an indictment or a police report, but does that referral form come with all of that information, or do you have to reach out to the referring office to obtain those documents?
It's supposed to come with all of that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. Do you recall in this particular case when you got the file that you started working from, what documents you had at that time?
I don't specifically recall what came originally. I believe I got the investigative summary up front, and an evaluation from a privately retained psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm probably an indictment. I don't remember specifically what came.
Okay. Your report, you did 2 different reports in this case, is that right?
That's correct.
You did a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation, right?
Yes, sir.
And I was going to deal with the difference in that in just a minute. You touched on it a little bit. What is the difference between a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation?
So a competency evaluation is how somebody's doing right at the time you do the evaluation. It's sort of a slice in time. Are they currently able to understand what's happening in court and able to work with their attorney in their own defense? A criminal responsibility evaluation is how the person was doing at the time of the alleged crime. So that answer could be very different depending on how much time has passed. So we have to look back and see what was going on in their life at the time of the crime.
So in this case, the criminal responsibility piece is looking at Ms. Driver around the December 8, 2020 timeframe, correct?
Correct.
And the competency evaluation is looking at her at the time that you conduct that actual evaluation,
That's correct.
because that is geared towards her case moving forward and whether she can be an assistance with that case and understands what she's going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you did the competency evaluation. You found her to be competent to stand trial, ultimately, right? That's not an issue that you're talking about today.
That's correct.
Yeah. When you did that competency evaluation, how long did you spend with her when you conducted that initial interview?
About an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, at that time it was 2 hours and 35
Okay, yeah,
minutes.
okay, yeah, I was gonna make sure we were correct. That was in August of 2022, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that was 2 hours and 35 minutes at the Cherokee County Detention Center with Ms. Driver.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall in that report, do you have the competency report with you as well?
I do.
I think this is the same for both evaluations, but you listed sources of information that you had in that evaluation. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And you listed several things, including Ms. Driver's, some records from Ms. Driver at the jail, hospital, medical records from her at the jail, correct?
That's correct.
Reviewed her Wellstar Kennestone Hospital records as well.
I did.
Specifically, some handwritten notes that she had made during the course of that stay at the hospital. Is that fair?
That's correct.
You said you had the indictment, a summary report from the City of Canton Police regarding their investigation, and you had a evaluation that had been conducted by a privately retained expert, in this case, Dr. Roberta Ballard, too. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you had the opportunity, I presume, to review all of those things before you went and saw Ms. Driver?
Some things I reviewed before and some things I reviewed after.
Okay.
Like to get her jail records, I had to get her to sign a release of information, so I got that information after.
Okay, okay. So when you went and met with her in August, she signed a release form for you to obtain the records from the jail?
That's correct.
And you reviewed those after your evaluation?
But
Okay.
before I wrote the report. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Did you ever reach out to myself or Ms. Trethewey to obtain any additional information that you would need for your evaluation of Ms. Driver on either incident?
I don't recall reaching out to counsel.
Okay. So tell me specifically, when you meet with Ms. Driver, how do you go about discussing these issues with her? I assume there's some sort of rapport you're trying to establish with her so she can be honest with you. Is that fair?
There's sort of we call it sort of a forensic rapport.
Okay.
There's, we're not overly friendly, but we're obviously, accepting and empathetic. We always start with an advisement of what their rights are. We let them know that it's not confidential. We let them know that they do not have to answer our questions, that they have the right to consult with their attorney, and that anything that they tell us can be included in a report, and we might have to come to court and testify, and that the information can be used at sentencing.
And Ms. Driver had already been through an evaluation with a privately retained psychologist that you were aware of, right?
That's my understanding.
So did she express to you that she understood what this process was going to be like?
She did.
Okay. And she didn't have any issues communicating with you about any of the questions you were asking her?
She did not.
So are there any specific types of tests that you do while you're conducting this evaluation, or is it really just talking to her about her experience?
Sometimes there's testing done. I did not do any testing in this case. I spoke with her. I did a clinical interview. I did a competency interview, and then when I went back, I did a criminal responsibility interview.
Would the testing be done more if you believe that there were cognitive issues with Ms. Driver?
If there's cognitive issues, if there's specific concerns that they might be feigning or exaggerating symptoms, if there's comprehension issues, yeah.
Okay.
we would
You
have
did not
testing
have
for that.
any concerns about any of those issues as it related to Ms. Driver?
I did not.
Okay. So when you talked to her, do you recall what the first set of topics were about this particular case with Ms. Driver?
About the case or about just in first topics covered in the interview?
Your interview.
Background information.
Okay. And what did you learn about Ms. Driver's background?
I learned that she has sort of an unstable early childhood, that her family moved around and she felt like they were kind of cold, but that she also left the family several times. She left and moved in with boys. She even left the state and moved in with a boy. She had some suicidal ideation early on, some self-injurious behavior, and we're talking about like cutting. She would cut her arms. She, I think, attempted an overdose on sleeping pills. She also abused substances. She started at a young age using marijuana and then cocaine and experimenting with some other drugs as well.
Did you ask her if she had ever been evaluated or diagnosed as a teenager or earlier on in her childhood?
She stated that when she was younger, she did get some treatment. She saw a doctor. She wasn't sure if it was like her pediatrician or a psychiatrist, but that she did see a doctor who prescribed her some antidepressants early on, but she did not take them.
Okay. And you're not aware of any records or evaluation reports that you've ever seen about her?
I have not seen any documentation of that.
Okay. And after discussing her background, what would your next topic of discussion generally be with an evaluation?
In the competency evaluation, the next step would be to talk to her, well, in both of them, the next step would be to talk to her about her current mental status, how she was doing at the time of the interview.
Okay, so let's skip off the competency evaluation piece. Let's just focus on the criminal responsibility.
So we would do that, the mental status in both evaluations.
Okay. When do you recall doing the second interview with her regarding the criminal responsibility
It was
piece?
about a month later in September of 2022.
And was there a difference in Ms. Driver's personality when she met with you both in August and September?
In August, she was upbeat. She described herself as being excited. She talked about not really sleeping and having a lot of projects she was working on in the jail. She said she was annoying her roommates by singing and dancing and doing gymnastics. So she was really very upbeat the first time I spoke to her. When I returned a month later, she showed signs that she had been crying before she came into the meeting. She was disheveled, her hair wasn't done, her jail clothing was disheveled, and she expressed sadness and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness.
Are those symptoms, or those signs of things that you saw from her just in her personality to you, are they things that you would pick up on in the nature of your evaluation of her?
That's pretty much the purpose of the mental status exam, is to look for things like that, because they can show sadness and feelings of hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of being persecuted, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in appetite, changes in activity level, change in the rate at which people speak, the rate at which they move. All of that can be suggestive of a depressed state, of being in an episode of depression. And then the other end, the being excited, not sleeping at all, having a lot of projects, really being in, like, a lot of people really love being that way because they get things done. They have a lot of things that they can do, and they have a lot of energy, and they don't feel like they need to sleep, so they'll stay up for days on end without getting any sleep, and that would be a sign of mania or hypomania, which is sort of a subclinical level of mania.
Okay. Part of the sources that you were reviewing in this case including her records from the jail, is that fair?
Yes.
And those records included evidence regarding medication that she was taking?
That's correct.
Can you describe the medication that she was on while she was in the jail at that point in time? Or even from when she came into the jail until you met with her?
So they actually changed her medications a lot. They tried different things, and she frequently said she didn't want to be taking any medications at all, and she would refuse the medication. So the medications were adjusted and changed and moved around a lot. When she first came in, she was taking medications to address mood, she was taking medications to address anxiety, and she was taking medications to address symptoms of psychosis, like hearing things, seeing things that aren't really there, disorganized thoughts, things like that.
Can you describe specifically the medication that she was on? Do you recall?
Can I refer to my notes?
Absolutely, yes.
So when she first came in, she was exhibiting signs of depressed mood, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and labile affect, which is how you present your mood, the outward expressions of emotion, and labile means that it moves up and down. So she had shifting moods, shifting emotions. So they were looking at a possible unspecified psychosis according to the records. So she was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, Visceral, which is actually an antihistamine, but it's given for anxiety, and Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic.
And that is, you said that was when she first initially was in the jail. Were those symptoms that she was being observed with in the jail, were they consistent with the, I guess, diagnosis or impressions that the medical staff at Kennestone had of her when she was at the hospital?
So my medical records, I believe, from Kennestone were incomplete.
Okay.
I only had about 118 pages from Kennestone Hospital, and there was only one psychiatric report in that file that I had.
Okay.
And at the time of that evaluation, she was sedated and did not give any information.
Okay, so that didn't really give you any information.
So I didn't
at all.
really have any information about her mental health from the hospital. So
Okay.
I started from the jail.
And so from the initial arrival at the jail and the description you just gave of her mood and her conditions that she was showing, how did that change over the course of the next months while she was incarcerated?
She continued to express a lot of paranoid ideation, thinking that people are out to get her, out to harm her, talking about her behind her back. She also expressed a lot of what we call delusions of reference, which is when you see something that's sort of innocuous and you interpret it as having some special meaning to you. So a lot of people will say, oh, I was getting a message from the TV or the radio, like it was talking directly to me. Not that I was hearing what they were saying, but there was something underlying it, a coded message that was just for them. Other people will think that they're getting instructions from people's facial expressions, body language, objects, and things like that. So she was describing getting a lot of coded messages from sounds she heard, things that facial expressions of people in the jail, that she was doing something wrong, that she shouldn't be there, things like that.
Those reports that you're referencing, those are things that she was telling you about in the course of your evaluation too, is that right?
Those are things she told to the jail staff, that the jail staff documented in their records, and she also told me very similar things.
Okay. And in conducting your evaluation, that is one of the things that you are trying to look at in terms of the consistency of what she is telling, not just yourself, but other people that she's interacting with. Is that fair?
Yes, consistency, and especially if there's if it's detailed. So you look at, if somebody gives you something really vague and then it changes, that is something that we are concerned that they might be making it up because they can't remember more detailed things to share over the time, so that it's very vague. And if they do try to use something that's detailed, then the details might change over time. So we look for both of those things.
Okay. And for an example, you noted this in your report that that she said to you that people are communicating with me through their body language and I'm not supposed to be here. Is that one of the things you recall her saying to you directly?
Yes, she said that in terms of how she was feeling in the jail, but she also said that she had felt those things before as well.
Okay. Before the incident date?
That's correct.
Okay. Did she talk to you about how long she had been feeling those paranoias, those concerns about how she was seeing and hearing things?
She told me that that actually started a long time ago when she was a teenager, and that she was feeling sort of a more generalized paranoia. She didn't give me details about what kind of thoughts she had as a teenager in terms of the paranoia. She also talked about having sort of magical thinking, which is when it's sort of the opposite of delusions of reference. The magical thinking is when you think that there's something about you that can control the world, even though there's no real connection. So she talked about being able to read minds and things like that and having a spiritual awakening. And that occurred prior to when she met her husband, but while she was using illicit substances as a teenager. And then she went off illicit substances, and I don't know whether she continued to experience delusions in between going off and when this occurred, but she said that the symptoms became particularly bad approximately 2 to 3 months before the alleged crime.
And why was that?
I think there's sort of a confluence of events. I think she started to feel worse. She suggested that she was starting to sort of question some of the things that she was being taught, and started to feel a little bit paranoid and was starting to experience those delusions of references. She was starting to see things and making them think that she needed to hurt herself, that she wasn't supposed to be in the universe, she wasn't supposed to be in the world. And that she reached out to her family, the family she was living with, and wasn't able to get help and was instead given CBD oil, and that once she started taking the CBD oil, that there was a big jump. She felt like it was very potent. That's how she felt. And that her paranoia and delusions of reference and magical thinking all increased sort of significantly and sharply after starting to take that drug.
Okay. Now, I'm going to kind of get to the CBD specifically. One of the things that you diagnosed her with was cannabis use disorder. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And is that based on the CBD that she was taking?
Yes, she believed that it had THC. Now I have no idea what was in the cannabis oil she was taking.
Right.
But she believed that it was intoxicating, and she continued to take it, and it was causing her significant distress.
Did she explain to you that the CBD that she was using was being given to her by the I guess, the husband in her life, Mr. Ben Michael?
She did. She indicated that she had ordered some online, but that Mr. Ben Michael, I've been calling him Mr. Joy, so I'll try and whatever is most consistent.
We've got 3 different names for him,
Yeah,
we're
so it's
trying
hard to
it
keep up.
clear.
But she said that he did not want her to use the commercial one, so he brought her one that was produced by a friend or brought to him by a friend. She didn't really know the source.
Okay. So what she was using was one that had been, what she told you she'd been using was one that had been provided by a third party, not the stuff that she ordered.
Correct.
Okay. Is it fair, Dr. Garrett, that the use of substances, illicit substances specifically,